In 1337, a dynastic dispute between the kingdoms of England and France ignited what would later become known as the 100 Years' War. Edward III of England claimed a right to the French crown, while Philip VI ruled France and rejected that claim. By 1346, the conflict was about to enter a decisive new phase. That summer, Edward crossed the English Channel and landed in Normandy with a powerful invasion force. His army advanced through the region, capturing towns, destroying supplies, and devastating the French countryside in a campaign designed to weaken Philip's authority and force him into battle. King Philip quickly assembled a much larger army and began pursuing the English. Edward moved north across France, searching for a safe route toward Flanders, while French forces closed in behind him. For days, the English marched under constant pressure, threatened by rivers, fortified crossings, and an enemy growing stronger with every mile. After crossing the river Somme, Edward finally stopped near the village of Crécy. Rather than continue running, he chose the ground carefully and prepared his exhausted army for battle. On August 26, 1346, Philip's forces approached him from the south. The pursuit was over. England and France were about to fight one of the most important battles of the Middle Ages. As the afternoon of August 26, 1346 drew on, the armies of England and France finally faced one another near the small village of Crécy. For weeks, King Edward III had avoided a decisive battle while marching across northern France, searching for ground where discipline and preparation could outweigh numbers. Here, he finally found it. The English occupied a gentle ridge overlooking the open countryside. It was not especially steep, but it offered one decisive advantage. Every French attack would have to advance uphill under constant enemy fire. Edward immediately deployed his army. At the center stood his dismounted men-at-arms, forming a solid defensive line against the expected cavalry assault. Along both flanks, thousands of English and Welsh longbowmen took their positions, planting arrows into the ground so they could fire as quickly as possible once the battle began. Years of relentless training had turned them into the finest archers in Europe. Across the field, Philip's VI's much larger army continued to deploy. Knights, infantry, cavalry, and thousands of Genoese crossbowmen slowly assembled beneath their banners. On paper, the French held every advantage, but assembling such a massive army on short notice was not an easy task. Units arrived at different times. Officers searched for their men, and valuable time slipped away while the English calmly waited on the ridge. French officers rode along the lines, shouting orders as the deployment continued. At the front stood the Genoese crossbowmen, experienced mercenaries hired to weaken the English before the night launched their attack. Their crossbows were powerful weapons, respected throughout Europe for their ability to pierce armor at close range. Behind them waited the flower of French nobility. For centuries, heavily armored cavalry had dominated medieval battlefields, and few commanders doubted that another determined charge would sweep the English from the ridge. Not everyone agreed with attacking immediately. Several nobles reportedly urged Philip VI to wait until morning. His men had marched for hours. Many formations were still incomplete, and parts of the army had only just arrived. But Philip feared that any delay might allow Edward to escape once again. The order to advance was given. The English answered with silence. No one moved. Edward intended to make the French fight entirely on his terms. The long line of Genoese crossbowmen slowly stepped forward across the open field. Behind them, French knights watched with confidence, expecting the mercenaries to weaken the English defense before the decisive cavalry assault. Edward remained patient. His archers didn't lose a single arrow. Every yard of French crossed brought them deeper into the range where the English longbow was at its deadliest. At last, the first Genoese bolts flew toward the English ridge. Seconds later, thousands of English bowstrings shaped almost to unison, sending dense volleys of arrow high into the sky before they plugged into the advancing formation. The contrast between the two weapons became immediately apparent. While the Genoese struggled through the slow process of reloading their crossbows, English longbowmen maintained an almost continuous rain of arrows. Before the French advance had ever reached the English line, the balance of the battle was already beginning to shift. Volley after volley tore into the advancing formation. The Genoese struggled to maintain order, but every rain of arrows opened new gaps in their line. Men fell before they could reload. Officers shouted desperately to keep the advance moving, and the attack steadily lost momentum. For the first time that afternoon, uncertainty spread across the French front. The carefully planned opening assault was collapsing long before the knights had even entered the battle. Eventually, survival overweighed discipline. Groups of Genoese crossbowmen turned back, hoping to regroup beyond the deadly range of the English bows. Missile troops often fell back after exhausting their effectiveness. Mounted knights drove their horses forward before the crossbowmen had cleared the field. Cows followed instantly. Knights crashed into retreating mercenaries, and officers lost control of their front ranks. Despite the confusion, the charge continued. Hundreds of armored knights lowered their lances and climbed toward Edward's position. The English archers now shifted much of their attention to the horses. A knight in armor was difficult to kill outright. The first great cavalry assault had failed. Small groups of knights reached the English line, but without the speed and momentum needed to break it. Survivors gradually pulled back, while riderless horses wandered across ground already littered with arrows. Edward ordered his troops to restore their formation. He understood that the English strength lay in discipline, not pursuit. For Philip VI, however, the battle was far from over. His army still outnumbered the English. Fresh groups of knights assembled beneath their banners, while surviving infantry and crossbowmen reorganized behind them. French banners advanced. The army prepared to throw its full weight against Edward's seemingly unbreakable defense. Despite two costly failures, Philip VI refused to abandon the battlefield. The English answered with remarkable discipline. Men at arms tightened their ranks, while thousands of archers calmly prepared another devastating volley. Then the battlefield exploded into violence once again. Longbows filled the sky with arrows as crossbows answered from below. Casualties mounted with terrifying speed. Every passing moment claimed more knights, more horses, and more banners. With every failed assault, the battlefield itself became a greater obstacle. Slowly, the assault began to unravel. Small groups withdrew first, followed by larger formations as officers struggled to restore order. What had begun as another determined attack was steadily turning into a disorganized retreat rather than chasing the enemy. The English line still held. Edward ordered his men to maintain formation, knowing that discipline had brought them this far. Medieval knights often fought close to the front, and Philip understood that his own courage might inspire one last effort. Seeing the attack falter, Philip VI personally rode among the surviving nobles, urging them forward one final battle. But leadership alone could no longer restore control. Units had become hopelessly mixed together. Commanders had lost contact with their men, and the army was beginning to collapse under its own confusion. Still, the French advanced once more. The remaining knights lowered their lances and pushed toward the ridge in a final attempt to break Edward's defenses before nightfall. The response was immediate. Another storm of arrows swept across the field, while English infantry absorbed the weakened charge. The exhausted French could no longer generate the momentum needed to break the line. The battle reached its final climax. Isolated groups continued fighting with extraordinary determination, but the outcome had already been decided. One by one, French banners disappeared as entire formations gave way beneath relentless English pressure. At last, the French army broke. What had begun as a confident advance dissolved into a general retreat. Knights, infantry, and the surviving Genoese crossbowmen all abandoned the battlefield. Among the dead was John of Bohemia, the elderly and nearly blind king of Bohemia. According to tradition, he ordered his companions to tie their horses together and lead him into the fighting. None of them returned. Only now did the English move forward from the ridge. The archers continued firing into the retreating army, while infantry secured the battlefield. Edward still refused a reckless pursuit. He understood that the victory had already been won, and preserving his army mattered more than unnecessary glory. As darkness settled over Crécy, the battle finally came to an end. Against overwhelming odds, Edward III had shattered one of the strongest armies in Western Europe. The victory opened the road to Calais and transferred the reputation of English longbow forever. But Crécy's greatest legacy reached far beyond England and France. For centuries, Europe's nobility had believed that armored cavalry ruled the battlefield. On a hillside near a small French village, that belief died beneath a storm of English arrows.